Hello, everybody. I recognize some people on this webinar already. That's really cool. All right.
Hey, everyone. Hope everyone's staying warm.
Hey, you stole my line. All right. It is 11 a.m. Eastern, and we like to be very prompt. So welcome, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. And my name is Joshua Cole, and I am going to be your host for the day. If you are on the in one of the polar vortex zones, yes, hope you're staying warm, dry, and your power stayed on, and you didn't lose anything in the refrigerator. And if your fridge went out, you obviously had a great place to preserve your groceries. So. This webinar is threat detection isn't enough. Vulnerability management makes it work. And that's a pretty bold statement, but we're going to tell you exactly why we're making that statement. So without further ado, let's go. So we're going to have about 50 minutes of content and followed by a Q&A. So if you have questions during the webinar, do not hesitate. Smash on the Q&A button. And enter in your question, and we'll capture it and at the end of the webinar. And if we don't get to your question, then we'll go ahead and we're happy to follow up with you afterward and get your question answered. So stay until the end. I know some people like to bail during these things. Hopefully this will be engaging enough for you to want to stay to the end, because in particular, we have an offer we hope that you won't be able to refuse. So without further ado, let me introduce your speakers for today. The first one is yours truly. I'm Joshua Cole. I am the co-founder and chief technology officer and second banana at Assura. You can see from the lovely bullet points that I created that I've spent a lot of time in IT and cybersecurity, and had a lot of different lived experiences in cybersecurity, shall we say. And one of the things that I'm most proud of is that I was the primary architect of our security operations business, which is now very ably being led by David Mizell, who is also on this call. Then joining me, and I'm going to let him introduce himself, is my colleague, John Aff.
So I'm not going to go over the numbers too much. I don't want to feel too old. But I have a lot of experience. In a previous life, I ran an entire security program for an enterprise company. And then after that adventure, I turned to consulting. And I've been doing both offensive and defensive consulting for a little bit. And it's been a lot of fun. I'm just helping companies grow, get better. And this presentation today, you'll learn a lot about, kind of our core business at Assura and, what makes us special. In addition to kind of my day-to-day, I spend a lot of time with conferences. I help organize conferences. Big shout out to HackSpaceCon, HackRedCon. If you guys are interested and local, check them out. I like to speak, and I like to play contests and run contests sometimes at DEF CON. And I'm also a proud dog dad. So great to meet you guys.
That's actually your most important attribute, John. So I mean, let's just get real here. It's being a proud dog dad.
He's right behind me.
Thanks, John.
So.
Yeah. I got a couple of they're like toddlers. What can I say? All right. So let's move on. So why are we doing this webinar? Well, first, SOC teams are overwhelmed with alerts. I don't think that is news to many people on this call. If you've ever had experience in delivering security operations, doing threat detection and monitoring, if you've ever had to interact with a SOC team, you know this. But for those of you who haven't, I'm going to tell you, SOC teams get a lot of alerts. Now, here's the other side of that. IT teams are overwhelmed with vulnerabilities and remediating those vulnerabilities. And so it's what it does is it causes your SOC teams to investigate uncontextualized alerts, and because the SOC team doesn't necessarily have the most up-to-date vulnerability information that they need in order to adequately and quickly investigate the alerts that are coming in. And the fact that they're overwhelmed by those alerts means that you want them to focus on the alerts that matter most. So when a SOC team gets an alert in, and it's uncontextualized, a lot of time they have to go and they have to ask their IT team about whatever the asset or assets are that are involved in that alert. And that produces that downstream wear and tear of time that the IT teams have to answer questions about the vulnerability state of a certain asset or group of assets. So here's the other thing, is that not all vulnerabilities can be addressed before they are exploited by a threat actor. So the it really means that both the SOC teams and the IT teams need to have clear visibility into the vulnerability status of assets in the environment in order to do their jobs adequately. And what this means is as I alluded to, they need that visibility to pursue what matters most in terms of securing the organization and investigating alerts and activity that take place inside of the organization. So what we want to do with this webinar is we want to share our experience in this to help you learn about uh, how you might be able to tackle some of these challenges. John, anything to add to that?
Yeah, just you never want to learn about a vulnerability, especially a really bad one at 3 a.m. when the SOC calls you. So, we'll go over it in the webinar, but there's a lot of things you can do to kind of turn those stones over every day and, make sure that you're aware of what's going on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So made the declaration that SOC teams are overwhelmed with alerts. And let's take a look at some of the data that backs that up. So the alerts are exploding because of, frankly, a lot of attacks that we've known and dealt with for many years. So things like ransomware, cybercrime, phishing, that sort of thing. But a new thing that's on the horizon, particularly with the explosion of AI, are things like deep fakes and AI-based attacks that are becoming more and more prevalent. So what that's doing is that's increasing the volume of alerts that security operations teams are receiving and having to investigate. So you can see that by the numbers what sort of an increase we're talking about, and that translates into dollars. And you can see from these dollar values that this is not a non-trivial amount of money that is not only costs your organization, but it costs societally as well. So the challenge is that you need to have the context when your teams are investigating these alerts. So when they investigate an alert, everyone needs to be investigated with a goal of answering one simple question: so what? Does this really matter? Okay, so the fact that an attack took place does not necessarily mean that it was successful. In fact, our security operations team can tell you that they detect a lot of attacks that are unsuccessful. But the idea is that they have the information at their fingertips in order to make that determination very quickly and move on to focus on the more the alerts that where they don't have as much context, where they really need to dig in, and they're not wasting time on alerts where they already have information and they can resolve those very quickly. So in most SIM platforms that security operations teams use, there is a gap in contextual information. They tell you SIM platforms can tell security operations teams what's going on in the environment from an activity standpoint, but they don't necessarily have the data available inside of them to tell them whether that alert should really matter, because they don't have information about whether that asset is vulnerable to that particular attack. They don't know whether the data that's stored, processed, and transmitted by that asset or group of assets is particularly sensitive. They don't necessarily know whether that asset is internal only or is internet facing. And so that could have a bearing on whether on the amount of response, the amount of investigation that takes place. So we're gonna talk through in a little bit. We're gonna talk about where that really comes into play and why that context matters so much. So John, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, just the I look at the slide and it's like the challenge, is the first line of the slide. Every alert really needs to be investigated. And a lot of teams, I see, will stop sometimes if they don't understand something, or, maybe just accept a risk without fully investigating the alert or understanding it. And, having to actually look in, that's time for our teams. That's a lot of work that doesn't go away no matter, what we do. So, that's uh, just important to highlight that, we need to look at every alert, and it can be overwhelming.
Absolutely, absolutely. So it's really important that for those alerts that are that where they really don't matter, that we're able to um, provide a disposition for those very, very quickly to move on to the ones that do. So if you take a look at how most organizations structure their security in this context, you have a security operations team that operates in the security operations center, and they're using a security incident and event management tool. They're seeing the activity going on in the environment. They're investigating those alerts. But vulnerability management is usually owned by the information technology department in an organization. So they're the ones that are doing things like looking for and remediating vulnerabilities in infrastructure assets like servers and firewalls and switches and storage and that sort of thing. And then if there's application development that takes place inside of that organization, the application teams are seeing the vulnerabilities in their applications that they need to address. Now, security plays a role in that they're making sure that they have visibility into whether the vulnerabilities are being remediated, like within SLAs and that sort of thing, but they're not going in, and they don't necessarily have the level of visibility to correlate vulnerabilities with what's going on in the environment from a threat management, threat detection standpoint. John, can you talk about where you've seen this construct in your career, in your experience?
Yeah, I've seen this a lot, and it's really frustrating because it can result in the IT teams, almost, just feeling stressed out, or, shrugging off the security team. If there's a critical that hits, sometimes it feels like there's that disconnect where, the security engineer will come into play, and it's not an everyday thing, and, we need to get this patched now. But if you're not working hand in hand, with this data, it just, it really doesn't serve anyone, you and your organization. I think it's really interesting, here at Assura, I own vulnerability management, but also pen testing as a service as well. So even just from an offensive, having that under one team, and being able to search for vulnerabilities and use, maybe other services that we have with the client, and vulnerability data to enrich our pen tests as well. There's a lot there as well. So it's a big challenge, and I think, all of these teams, need to work hand in hand. We just have the blessing of living at a security company, so we're a little more concerned about it than most, and yeah.
For sure, for sure. And so this is where I'm going to talk through why these two things, the security operations side of the house and the vulnerability management side of the house, when they get married, they're like peas and carrots. They go together like peas and carrots. And so I'm going to give two, these are real life examples of where we've seen that this is really important. And so example one is what I'm calling the website wild goose chase. So an organization has a public website. It's built on WordPress, very, very prevalent content management system. In fact, Assura uses WordPress for our own website. It's very, very flexible, very extensible. There was a highly exploitable, highly severe 0-day for a WordPress plugin that hit the world many years ago. Security Operations Center for that client, their SOC provider, their console started, and this actually took place before we had our own Security Operations Center. So this is from many, many years ago, but it still holds to this day. So their SOC, their console started lighting up because they started to see active attempts to exploit this vulnerability. So the SOC starts to investigate it's red alert time, and they're going through, they're getting ready to activate their incident response plan for this organization. But here's the thing. When they finally got in touch with the website team told them that they don't even use that plugin. So they spent hours of precious time investigating and responding to an attack on a system that wasn't even vulnerable. So had they had that visibility, they would have avoided all of that heartache. I'm going to take another example. This is a real life example, and this is with a client many years ago. I was actually acting as an interim contract CISO for them, and so this hit like I literally just started working with them and helping them with this, and so this is anybody hopefully remember Log4j, the Log4Shell vulnerability back in 2022. It was a 10 out of 10 CVSS score, very, very severe, a lot in part because major platforms across the web used this particular library, including Apple for iCloud, and VMware used it. So it was a big thing. So I'm going kind of through the timeline. You can sort of see that from basically within a month, that vulnerability was announced. There were more severe vulnerabilities announced. Within a handful of days, active exploitation started being reported. Tenable reported that 10% of all assets in the world were vulnerable to this thing. And then by the 10th of January of 2023, Microsoft was warning about active exploitation from a Chinese operator, a ransomware gang. So here was the first thing that I asked when this when we were working on this for this client. That is, which assets are vulnerable? Nobody could tell me. They were not doing adequate vulnerability management at the time. And so we had to bring in instrumentation and tooling. And we basically had to go and reverse engineer this entire enterprise in order to answer that question so that we knew where to focus our energy on remediation first. It was a big job. It took every bit of that of 2 months to get through everything. It was quite the thing. John, did you have a similar experience when this thing hit?
Yeah, Log4j was tough, I would say, because a lot of times, even if you have some vulnerability management, if it's not mature, it's hard to capture stuff like this where it's might be a component of an application. So you're not specifically looking for an application, called Log4j. You're looking for, an application that uses that in their development processes. And, the time frame there, it's pretty crazy. Active exploitation, 11 days after being reported. Um, so could you imagine, getting hit and, being woken up with a critical alert, and you don't even know what systems, are vulnerable to this.
Absolutely. And that's the name of the game is buying time until you can address it till and in this particular instance until vendors like VMware could address it and
Yeah.
release updates and the time spent in actually releasing those testing and releasing those updates into the environment. So um, here's the thing. Some platforms actually do try to address this, but they can fall short. So they'll have a vulnerability scanner that is sort of bolted onto the platform. It's not a core function. They use traditional sort of correlation rules based detections. Now, granted, they use real-time threat intelligence feeds for their detections. Um, they provide SecOps teams with some vulnerability and asset criticality information from within the platform. But here's the thing, and here's the catch with these and where they fall short, is that they don't actually use those vulnerabilities to go and automatically enrich the detection capability of the platform. So what those security operations teams, those analysts and engineers have to do is they have to take the vulnerabilities and then they have to go and write new correlations and enrich the platform by hand. So they're already busy, as we said, with investigating alerts. This is yet one more, and doing tuning and making sure that they have the adequate fidelity. This is yet one more thing that they have to do as a part of this. So this is after stating all of the problems and the challenges. Let's talk about some of the lessons that we've taken away from working with clients and addressing this. First, the quality and the completeness of the vulnerability data really matters. I think that should be obvious. It goes without saying, but let me tell you something. Not all vulnerability scanners are created equal. There are open source vulnerability scanners out there that are good for certain things, but sometimes that they leave us a little cold when it comes to the fidelity of the information that comes back from them. So a lot of challenges are with false positives. So some of these scanners, in our experience, they're they tell you that there is a positive, but they cannot tell you why. The fingerprint of the vulnerability comes back and it's incorrect, or sometimes it just doesn't tell us anything at all. It just says, hey, this thing is vulnerable, but it doesn't tell us why. It gives us no data. So that's one big thing. The other thing is on the other side is false negatives. And that is where we've seen some vulnerability scanners conduct scans on assets that we knew had a vulnerability and yet that vulnerability didn't get picked up. And so it's like, well, what else is it missing in there? A lot of vulnerability scanners out there, particularly some of the open source ones, they don't have the ability to go and do configuration audits to look for configuration based vulnerabilities. So not all vulnerabilities have to do with a security defect in a piece of code. Sometimes it's just a misconfiguration, or it's a configuration out of a outside of a best practice from an approved baseline. Like we recommend to our clients that they implement the Center for Internet Security benchmarks as security baselines. And so a lot of times we don't with some of the products that we've used, we haven't been able to we can't get that information. And so that information is just as critical as finding out that, hey, this version of Windows has a vulnerability. The other thing is, some platforms have a very limited ability to scan cloud-based assets. Like if you have software as a service platforms, or you are running workloads inside of containers in Amazon Web Services or Azure or Google. A lot of times these platforms don't have the ability to identify vulnerabilities in those. And then the other thing that we find as a challenge is some platforms do not have an agent-based ability to scan, so they can only scan assets where they have clear network line of sight available to them. John, have you seen this as well?
Yeah, I definitely recommend that, any organization uses an agent-based and network-based scanning tool. It's not even just, whether or not it's network. Sometimes the agent-based ones cover more stuff like third-party software and, a bunch of other, like you were saying, benchmarks on the system. So I think it's good to have both controls covered.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Second lesson is that the status of the vulnerability matters. And you can see all of the sort of the things that come up with respect to vulnerabilities when security operations teams are investigating, and they go to the IT team and they're like, hey, what's that actually the status of this asset and the vulnerabilities in this asset? And so the IT teams they have day jobs. They have a lot of demands on their time. So it's a lot easier when security operations teams have this information at their fingertips. However, on the other side of that, the security operations teams also need to know this information so that they know where to focus their attention. So if there is a vulnerable asset and there's an actively and that asset has an actively exploited vulnerability on it, they need to make sure that they're turning their attention to that asset or that group of assets with that vulnerability. So it's again that push and pull. So having that vulnerability status really makes a difference. John, you want to add to that?
Not really. You said everything pretty well. I think it's important to monitor the status of it and know what your teams are doing, know where to focus. And, really as the size of the organization, whatever it is grows, you're going to need to scale that. So, even if one person on your team knows, it's important that your whole team has the same information.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for complimenting me on covering this information. I appreciate it. All right. Lesson number 3, and that is not all vulnerabilities come from one vulnerability source. So, for instance, if you're using a vulnerability scanner like, I'll name names like Rapid7's Inside VM or Qualys or Tenable Vulnerability Manager, what they identify does not constitute the universe of all vulnerabilities in an environment. So, we need to make sure that we're filling that vulnerability gap. So there are several things that we need to do. first off, we need to capture the data from across the vulnerability spectrum inside of the organization. That data needs to be folded back into the detection capabilities in the Security Operations Center in real time or near real time, and it needs to be up to date. So that all constitutes a gap in most vulnerability programs, and where security operations teams also need a lot of insight. So if you have an application development capability inside of your organization, um, the SecOps, the Security Operations Center, needs to know the vulnerability status of those applications in order to have adequate fidelity into the security posture and what types of attacks they need to be able to detect. Go ahead, John.
So yeah, I just wanted to say that what's important here is all the tools that he was mentioning are great tools in their own respects, and it's layering them to make sure that we get a clear picture of the whole organization and its risks.
Absolutely, absolutely. So more data, more information is better. So let's now take those lessons and apply them and start and discuss our best practices. So best practice number one is start with good data. We kind of hit where it's painful to have data where you don't understand what the data source is doing, how it derived the information that it's delivering to you, and exactly, and you have the confidence in the accuracy of it. Because otherwise, again, you're making decisions based on incomplete or inaccurate data. And so we want to try to prevent that garbage in, garbage out. So this is, we happen to use Tenable vulnerability management with our clients who do not have their own vulnerability scanning platform available to them. But the point is, there are others out there, and the point is to get good data and make sure that you have high confidence in the data that you're ingesting from your vulnerability sources. The next best practice is taking that data from those sources and unifying it, normalizing it, enriching it, and making sure that it provides actionable insights, and it provides a way for your IT teams to track the status of those the vulnerability remediation, that your security operations teams know what the status is, and they know where those vulnerabilities exist. And so we happen to use a platform called Nucleus to help us with this. There are others out there, but this one is the one that we've chosen. It's the as far as we're concerned, it's the best one on the market, and it does this. It takes vulnerability data from throughout an organization's ecosystem. It unifies it. It applies information, risk-based information about things like what the sensitivity of the data is that's being stored, processed, transmitted by assets. It determines, it tells us whether a vulnerability is being exploited in the wild, and how much, and then it gives us a risk score based on all of that information. And John, your team uses Nucleus every single day. Do you want to share some
Yeah,
additional insight into this?
Nucleus is great. I've heard it called the decision engine in the past. So this is something that a lot of teams I feel like struggle with. You start with maybe one scanning tool. We were talking about layering tools before. You realize, okay, well this isn't good enough. It's not a full picture. You start to get more tools, but more tools is more overhead, more time, more people to manage those tools, and then you might have exports from multiple tools, and give you a little bit conflicting data, or overlapping data, or you just can't make sense of it. So Nucleus is what gives us that kind of, unified vulnerability fabric, to be able to look through and really understand the bigger picture for your organization, and also, to some of Josh's earlier points, prioritize those vulnerabilities based on assets. So, if a server's internet facing, it might bump up a score, or, if it's not vulnerable, we can mark that in there and, continue to have it dynamic for everything else, and, adjust risk based on other, various factors. So, anyway, Nucleus has been a super great tool. Our clients love it. We love it. And not to badmouth any of the other tools, because they give it, the power to be great. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And, we even take our penetration test results for our clients. And if they're a vulnerability management client as well, we put those in a Nucleus.
Hmm.
And so you get that really good complete picture. It's so this is the thing is, as much as having the data is important, it's turning that data into information and normalizing it, and again making it actionable. And so having a platform that can help you to do that is really critical. All right, so John kind of alluded to it, and that is making sure that you're um, tackling remediation of vulnerabilities based on risk. And so there's this wonderful scoring system that's out there that's been adopted by the industry, the Common Vulnerability Scoring System. But here's the thing about it: there are certain aspects of it that can help to provide some context for your own for what a vulnerability means in your environment, but it doesn't provide a completeness of picture as much as we would like. So what the best practice is to make sure that you are answering questions like John mentioned in the previous slide. Is this where is this asset? Is it an internal only facing asset? Is it internet facing? Is it completely air gapped? I mean, honestly, if it's completely air gapped, you can probably wait on remediating that vulnerability in favor of those internet-facing assets. And then answering the location question also helps your security operations team to understand how severe or how much response they need to provide um, to an investigation. So, for instance, if they're seeing a vulnerability being exploited on an internal only facing asset, that's really bad, right? That means somebody is already inside of your environment, and you need to red alert and activate your incident response plan. The next thing to answer is how easily exploited is that vulnerability? Because some even high CVSS 10 scores are very difficult to pull off. Is it actively being exploited by threat actors? That's one thing. It's like one thing for the vulnerability to be announced. It's another thing if it's not being exploited yet. And so this is what the next thing to answer is one of those things that kind of gets missed is you don't necessarily have to remediate the root vulnerability if in the exploitation of that vulnerability, there are intermediate steps that form a chain, and you just need to break one of the links in that chain in order to prevent that an attacker from exploiting that vulnerability. That can buy you time until you can remediate the root vulnerability. The thing to answer is what is actually the sensitivity of the data on those vulnerable assets. So obviously, if you are a healthcare provider and there's a system with patient data on it versus your a application for scheduling lunches or whatever. Two different levels of sensitivity, data sensitivity. And by the way, I want to say something about data sensitivity. It's not only confidentiality. Don't forget the other two pillars of cybersecurity and data protection, which is integrity and availability of data. And then finally, ask yourself whether there are compensating controls that can be put into place in while you buy time until you are able to remediate the root vulnerability. So for instance, if a web application has a vulnerability, is there a web application firewall in front of that application, and you can add a WAF rule to that until the root vulnerability can be remediated in code. So all that is to say, using a risk-based approach to remediation is going to help your IT teams be more efficient and focus on what really matters. And it's going to help your security operations team to understand what they need to put the magnifying glass on when they are doing their threat detection and monitoring. John, I'm going to turn it over to you for some color commentary on that.
Sure. So the important part is, just doing the work, flipping those stones over. If you decide that, through this approach that, vulnerability is worth accepting, or whatever else, that's okay. But, you have to flip over those rocks and understand what makes up your network and where the cracks are. So, you can fix them.
This is where a thorough understanding of your environment, the relationships between the assets and the applications, the data flows, what data you have in the environment becomes critical. And it's critical not only for this, it's critical for a well-functioning cybersecurity program in general. But this really highlights why security practitioners jump up and down about doing things like data classification and sensitivity analysis and asset discovery and keeping asset databases up to date. So let's move on to best practice number 4, which is to have your security operations team use an advanced extended detection and response platform, a good XDR platform. Because an XDR platform these days is going to take that vulnerability information in real time, and it's going to use it as part of its detection and correlation capabilities. And the best XDR platforms out there are using machine learning, artificial intelligence, machine learning for their detections, and then they're using generative AI to help security operations teams, the human beings, to accelerate their investigations. So those are all that's the best practice these days. The old days of strictly manual correlations and all of that stuff, those days are gone. The world moves too fast. The threat actors move too fast in their techniques to just have detections being done by the known. You have to have machine learning and behavioral analysis and get data from across the enterprise brought into that platform, including that vulnerability data, in order to adequately detect and respond to those threats. John, anything to add to that?
No, you did great.
Awesome. Your name is John. I feel like you're like the John Madden, and I'm like Pat Summerall. I'm doing the play-by-play. You're doing the color commentary. Maybe we ought to go call the Super Bowl. All right. So let's put this all together into action. Talked a lot about, best practices, and how do these things all fit together? So let's you have an environment. In this case, it would be our client's IT environment, on premises, in the cloud. Pretty much every organization on the planet these days, other than maybe some of the 3-letter agencies in the world, they have cloud workloads of some sort of or another, right? They have a vulnerability scanning platform. That vulnerability scanning platform scans the environment for vulnerabilities. Makes sense, right? So where does that vulnerability data go? The first place it should go is into your XDR platform. The next place is obviously your vulnerability and exposure management platform to get both places enrich, normalize, and help with context in different ways. So the XDR platform is contextualizing its detections. The vulnerability and exposure management platform is contextualizing for exploitability. The other thing you want to make sure of and we talked about is getting into that vulnerability and exposure management platform, getting data in from other vulnerability sources. Then what your security operations analysts yield is the benefit they reap is that from the XDR platform, they're getting alerts that matter. They're not getting alerts on for WordPress sites that don't even have an exploitable vulnerability, a vulnerable plugin on it. If they do need additional context, they go and they query the vulnerability and exposure management platform for additional things like what kind of data is being stored, processed, transmitted on this. Is this internet facing only or internal? Is it what's the actual risk score for this? And then vulnerability analysts like John and his team, they're going to help to add to that by providing context into what they're seeing coming into the vulnerability and exposure management platform and providing remediation guidance for the team and helping to determine based on exploitability, based on a number of factors, where should IT teams focus their attention on remediation and helping them with that. Now, the other thing that the security operations center team will then derive is they'll get really good data about which assets are vulnerable and where they need to then go and perhaps help the AI detection with some advanced monitoring rules. Because for instance, in our security operations center, we have this really cool thing called automated threat hunting. So we can actually we can teach the machine to help us out based on information it may not know, but we know from this additional vulnerability information. So that's kind of that's the what it looks like in action. John, anything to add to that?
Just I alluded to it a little before, but here at Assura, like the vulnerability management services, run by me and other offensive security professionals, we are just as capable to exploit these vulnerabilities. So when we talk about it, it's not us reading, just something from a tool. We're looking at data from a tool, but we're going to give you an expert opinion about, what is really important in your network. Is it something that, we see day to day being exploited doing these tests, on other customers? So, yeah.
Well, and that's the benefit of having real real white hats doing this type of work and this vulnerability analysis, because thank heaven your evil bit is flipped to 1, but it's being used for good instead of evil. So how an attacker could really use a vulnerability to compromise an environment, and how easy or difficult that may be, and what the level of effort would be on that. So to provide really good insights to clients about that. So I'm going to look at my crystal ball and do some future gazing here and give a prediction for the future of what this is going to look like. Because if you notice, this is a lot of back and forth. You got the SOC analysts logging into multiple things and and it's a lot of it's good. The data's better, the information's better, it's being used in multiple places and more in real time. So get a lot of the same stuff, but here's my prediction is that eventually instead of going only from the vulnerability scanning platform into the XDR platform, that vulnerability data, that the XDR platform is going to get the fully enriched and up-to-date vulnerability information from the vulnerability and exposure management platform. The SOC analysts are going to query the XDR platform because it's going to have all of that data inside of it so that they don't have to go into multiple panes of glass. And then the other thing that I predict is that it's great to know this stuff, but like we've mentioned, IT teams have a lot of fatigue in keeping up with vulnerability management. So things like automated or one-click remediations out of a vulnerability and exposure management platform are things that are on the horizon. That is my prediction. Take it for what it's worth. It's worth what you paid for it. All right, so I'm going to wrap up. Clearly, visibility and context are absolutely essential for effective threat response. I hope we have demonstrated that for you. And vulnerability management and security operations, that threat detection capability, they can't live in silos anymore. They're too critical to each other to live on their own. They have to be married up. And then leveraging the technology in an architecture that makes sense so that the data is with the people that need it the most when they need it, and to help the machines help us is very, very critical. So I didn't read all of these because I hate just reading slides and reading bullet points. It drives me crazy. So I was going to do it. Y'all are literate. You can read them. John, anything to sort of tie a bow on this from your perspective?
Uh, we can do all of it, and I guess we'll get to that soon. We're happy to help your teams. This stuff is a struggle. It's day to day. It's hard work. Like I said, it's like stepping on the scale every day, looking or not looking. But once you understand what's there and you're comfortable with your environment, it gets a lot easier, and you start to anticipate things, and I've seen a couple shops mature, and it's a really great thing when it happens, and we're happy to help you get there.
Absolutely. Here's the thing as well. Even if you don't use our services, we're happy to talk about this stuff. This is the most important thing, is that the community leverages our lessons and hopefully applies them and reaps the benefit of the things that we've learned over the years and that we're applying. So irrespective, feel free to reach out to us. So now I'm going to get to the offer that hopefully you can't refuse. And for anybody on this webinar who is a brand new client to Assura, or not yet a client for Assura, we're offering substantial discounts on our managed SIM, our managed SOC and VMAS bundle. I say SIM, it's really XDR. And so we're going to discount up to potentially even waiving our onboarding. Our onboarding is usually 20% of the first year's service charges. And so you would save potentially a lot of money on that. If you're a current client who doesn't have one or the other of these services, come talk to us. We have something different for you, but that's also special. So, talk to us about this. We're hoping that this will be so good. We're going to save you more money than Geico. You don't have to go build it yourself, etc. All right. So 2 last slides. Just want to put a plug in, and we'll be announcing these. We're going to have future webinars. The next one is on March 18th, AI governance and cyber risk. That's going to be a banger. So be on the lookout for announcements on that. And you can see the other webinars that we're planning and sort of the time frames that we're planning on those. So again, don't just delete the emails that we send out announcing these. Sign up, come join us. And then your feedback really matters to us. We want to get really good at these. We want to get better at these. And without your feedback, we can't do that. We can't fix what we don't know is broken. We also accept kudos and praise. We like both. So we're going to send out a link after the webinar. It's 5 minutes. I've timed it myself. It's really just 5 minutes. Please give us 5 minutes of your time to take the survey. Now, we are at the Q&A. We ran a little long, but I'm hoping that it's going to give us enough time. So, Allie, do we have questions?
We do not at the moment, but if anyone has any questions at all, please feel free to drop them in the chat.
Go right on ahead.
Any question at all.
Man, did we answer everything? I can't believe it. All right.
Okay.
Cool. All right, y'all. Well, thank you very much for joining us. I appreciate it. John, I think I speak for John and Allie in saying that we appreciate it as well. And join us for the next webinar. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.